Hey guys, Buffaque 32 here. Hope you're doing well today. For this fourth video, I thought I'd do something a little different and tell you guys a story about a gentleman I met a few years ago who is one of the few remaining survivors of the USS Indianapolis. If you're not already familiar with the story of the USS Indianapolis, I encourage you to do a little bit of research. It's really quite an interesting story. If you've seen the movie Jaws, you already have a little bit of insight into what I'm talking about. The story that was told during Robert Shaw's dialogue in the movie is quite accurate, but getting to speak with one of the actual survivors for myself was a really interesting time. My grandfather is retired Navy. He was in the service during the Korean War, and he served on the USS Crow, which was a DE, a destroyer escort. And he still goes to a lot of his Navy meetings, and he invited me a couple of years ago to come to one of the meetings with him. And I thought, yeah, that sounds really interesting and certainly into history, and so I thought, well, I'll come along. Well, I didn't realize that at that meeting I was going to be going to was one of the few remaining survivors of the USS Indianapolis. And so once I found out that he was going to be a regular at these meetings, I asked my grandfather, I said, do you care if I come with you to the next one? Of course, he was fine with that. And so I went out and purchased Doug Stanton's book, In Harm's Way, which very well chronicles the entire story from beginning to end of what happened with Indianapolis and its voyage of delivering the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb. Basically, what I wanted to share with you was what I found out during the, if you want to call it an interview, I guess you could. It was pretty informal when I sat down with the man, but his name is James Wesley Smith. Yeah, listed right here. James Wesley Smith. I actually had him put his initials in there in the book for me. But I bought this book and I brought it along with me the second time, and I asked him if he'd care to share any details about what happened. And I was already fairly familiar with the story, and so, I was already aware of a lot of the, the more general details that you can find just from reading online articles. But a couple of the things that he told me that I found interesting were things that you don't necessarily find in reading the articles. It's kind of more of a interpretation or, personal opinion sort of thing. One thing he told me that I found very interesting was he said that when the ship went down and all the men, went into the water and they all started getting in either lifeboats or they had on life vests, he said that it was a good while. He said, to his memory, it was a day or so before the shark attacks started taking place. In the movie, I think they mention that, I think Robert Shaw says, sometime around sunrise, the sharks started to attack the sailors, and Mr. Smith says that to his memory it was not quite that quick. It was a little while later when men actually started having to try to fight off the sharks. Another thing that I thought was really interesting was he said that his concern was not so much for the sharks. Now, he was not in one of the boats. James was actually hanging on the side of one of the life rafts. He said he had his own life vest, and he was hanging on the side of one of the life rafts. And he said there were several men in the water who were badly injured and others who were very sick, and he said that those were the ones that they tried to keep the boats for, and all of those who hadn't been too badly banged up in the explosion either were treading water while wearing their life vests or were hanging on the sides of the boats. He said that he was not so concerned about the sharks after about the second day because he was so tired, he was more afraid of, well, we're never going to be found. That's kind of an interesting thought if you really think of it. He was not afraid of a shark attacking him and dragging him under the water because he was so convinced that help would never come. He thought, well, I will either, one, I suppose, die of thirst, or by the time a shark gets to me, I'll be completely out of my mind anyway, and I won't really know what's happening. That, to me, stuck out as interesting. I thought that's a really interesting thing to hear. You would think that you're constantly being in fear of these things swimming around you, and he said, no, I was more just concerned about the fact that I'm never going to be found. You know, my family will not know what happened. I thought that's kind of a interesting little bit of insight. Anyway, he shared a few other little things with me, but for the majority of what he had to tell me, it was stuff that I'd already read in the book. But those couple of things that he shared, I thought that's interesting and maybe worth mentioning because as far as talking with a survivor of the USS Indianapolis, it's not something you can do just any time. There are not many of these guys left. I don't know how many it is now, but I think only a little over 300 guys came out of the water after this entire thing, and there were originally 1,100 men on that vessel. So that's a pretty big loss. Excuse me. And so to go along with this story, I have out here my CRKT emergency rescue knife. I thought this is kind of an interesting knife to have along with this story, just simply for the fact of talking about survival or rescue or whatever. I thought this is kind of a fitting knife to talk about today. This is a great little knife. I'm a big fan of CRKT and their products. It's actually their M16 line. So if you're already familiar with the M16 model, a lot of them look the same. They kind of have the same skeletonized grip. The thing that stuck out to me when I saw this in the shop was what looked to me at the time to be just an oversized flipper. I thought, man, that's a really big flipper. You can definitely get a hold of that without issue. And then as soon as I picked it up, I realized, oh, that's actually a seatbelt cutter. That's kind of a handy thing to have. And that's primarily the only reason I picked this knife up. I thought, well, if I'm traveling, this would be a good thing to have in my pocket. You know, if I'm traveling from, say, state to state or long distance, or certainly anywhere that you think you may be driving along maybe a large body of water or something, having a seatbelt cutter as well as a glass breaker, which this thing has in the end of it, right there, a little glass breaker. I thought, this could be a handy thing to have in your pocket, while you're driving, because it's scary to think, but accidents happen every day, and being prepared with something like this in your pocket, if you know you're going to be spending a lot of time in the car, having something like this in your pocket might be worthwhile. The steel, yeah, it's okay. It's not great. It's AUS 8, not the best, but certainly not the worst either. I think blade length's a little under 4 inches. I think it's like 3.8 or something like that. Satin finish, I think it's right around 6 ounces, so it's not too heavy. Comes with a nice clip. You can, of course, remove the clip. One thing that you guys will probably notice as I do more of these videos, I'm not a pocket clip kind of guy. I remove the pocket clip from most of my knives. I only have a couple where I leave it. Obviously, this is one where I chose to leave it on there. But for the most part, I like to just let the knife kind of fall down in my pocket. I don't like it to be sticking up. But for this one, I chose to leave it on there because I thought, well, you can access it sooner if you have that pocket clip, and I guess the point of having a emergency knife is so that you can get to it quickly should you need it. So anyway, yeah, liner lock system, pretty basic. Steel liners. Just a nice knife, a good looking knife. I like the blade shape. I don't care that it's not plain edge. I wish the whole thing were plain edge and didn't have the serrations, but I couldn't find one that was just plain edge. All the ones I found were, well, I take that back. All the ones I found were either plain edge with the Tonto style tip, or they were multi-edge. They had, you know, plain and then serrations, and I ended up going with this one. I thought, well, that's fine. I'll make deal with it. But anyway, kind of a nice little knife. I've been very happy with it. Carried it several times, and it does a great job, really. So anyway, I hope you kind of enjoyed today's little story. Something interesting that you definitely don't hear about every day. If I have any more interactions in the future with James Smith, I'll definitely keep you guys posted. To my knowledge, he's still alive and well. It has been a year or two since I've seen him, but hopefully he's still around and doing well. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully I'll be getting another video out in the next day or so. So anyway, thanks guys for watching. See you next time.